Hello everybody, Maven here, and remember those piece of trash class glaives, the Edge of Concurrence, the Edge of Action, and the Edge of Intent? They were always so garbage. They weren't better than legendary glaives, but Bungie finally buffed them and made them useful, and now they're actually pretty insane. So now you don't have to like shoot 5 enemies with glaive projectiles to charge your perk. Now glaive melee swings also count towards that progression. So it's a lot easier to spam that ability. It takes a lot less as well, a lot less ammo consumption. So today I wanted to break down what they're capable of and the best builds to absolutely abuse them. So let's get to it. Hope you enjoy. Shout out to our sponsor, Advanced GG, the #1 gaming supplement in the world. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off. Link down below. Thank you. So let me demonstrate how these glaives work now. There's a meter on the bottom left. I'm going to zoom in on it just to make things a little bit easier. And you got to fill that up to 6 to activate your perk, and you can do a special reload. So what you used to have to do before the rework is get your glaive energy full by means of getting projectile hits, and then you consume all your glaive energy to do your special shot. But now you just got to fill that meter in the bottom left, so it's a lot easier because you can activate it with either the glaive melee hits or the projectiles. Both of them will fill that meter, so it's a lot more forgiving than before and a lot more spammable. And it also grants you 1 ammo when you activate your perk. So it's essentially giving your glaive infinite ammo if you only do melees. So these glaives just became 10 times more viable, and I love this rework. Now obviously, there's 1 glaive for each class, but it's pretty common knowledge at this point that there's currently a bug that allows any class to equip any class glaive. So for example, I can equip the Warlock class glaive on my Titan and make healing turrets. Now, Bungie did disable class glaives for the Sunder Doctrine contest mode, so it's assumed that this feature was unintended and will be fixed at some point in the future. But as of releasing this video, this bug is still in the game, and we have no idea how long it'll be here, but I'm guessing it's going to be a while. So if you want to abuse it, then by all means, go for it. The Hunter glaive could be pretty solid on Warlock, and the Warlock glaive could be pretty solid on Titan. But for the sake of longevity with these builds today, I'm going to use these class glaives on their respective classes, so keep that in mind. And I will leave timestamps to all 3 of these builds if you want to skip around to your favorite character. Without further ado, let's kick things off with the Titan. Now in the background gameplay, you may or may not have seen me running through the solo expert lost sector with this build, and it was an absolute breeze. And keep in mind, the season is fresh and the artifact is low. So I was 23 power below this activity, so it was nearly at GM difficulty, but it didn't matter because this build is a beast. It's a damage monster. And the reason why is because we are using the Wormgod Caress as our exotic of choice. It has a perk Burning Fist, defeating a target with a melee, which also counts a glaive melee, or a finisher, grants an escalating melee damage buff which decays over time. Higher levels of Burning Fist grant increased weapon damage. Now when it comes to glaives, the Wormgod Caress gives them plus 200% glaive melee damage, and then when you get to 5 stacks, your glaive projectile is also going to be doing 35% more damage. And on top of that, we have the Aspect Banner of War, which is not only giving us insane healing and survivability, but is also granting us another 25% melee damage bonus to our glaives. So in other words, this build absolutely slaps. And it's really easy to keep those Wormgod stacks up by getting glaive melee kills. It's pretty effortless to do that when you have 225% bonus damage. Not to mention, you can also get up those stacks by grapple meleeing or using your frenzied blades. There's a lot of ways to keep those stacks going. Now as for the glaive itself, you might have already seen in the gameplay, but we can shoot out those chocolate lava cakes once we get that perk full. We can set up those little mini bubbles, and when we walk inside of them, we get bonus reload speed, but most importantly, we get a void overshield to make us a lot tankier, and we can keep on dipping back into our bubble if we need to refresh our overshield. And it's really easy to just spam these bubbles all over the place and have multiple up at a time, and we can just have overshields everywhere. And stacking that on top of Banner of War makes it really easy to survive. However, these lava cakes do have a bit of a flaw. I'll show you a clip here against Carl. If you're dealing with a fatter target and you try to place a lava cake on their body and melee them from within it, then this can happen. Sometimes your glaive melee or even your regular melees will whiff on them, and it's really annoying. Something Bungie has never thought about fixing, but I really hope they do fix it, because this has always been a problem with the Ward of Dawn as well. It's been pretty aggravating. It's also a problem with Titan barricades, and if you're a PvP player, you know what I mean. So just be mindful of where you place those lava cakes when you're trying to deal with the target. Now furthermore, they also updated this glaive with destabilizing rounds, and as you know, destabilizing rounds itself got a massive buff where if enemies are hit by the AoE effect of destabilizing rounds, you get volatile rounds. So this glaive is pretty solid at ad clear. And I'll show you this clip I did in Breakneck so you can see its ad clear capabilities with that destabilizing rounds added on. And it's pretty solid. It's very nice to have its volatile explosions going off. And if you're playing on a Void subclass, you also have controlled demolition on top of that to heal you for these volatile explosions. So it's good. Honestly, could be a little bit better. And you'll see what I mean when we get to the Hunter build. Hint, hint. And by the way, I'm going to show the same types of gameplay clips in all same 4 areas for all 3 of these characters. There's going to be the heavy ad clear in Breakneck, and there's going to be the easy content in Conflux, the medium content in the Hydroponics Delta, and the hard content in the Solo Expert Lost sector. So you can see how these builds hold up in all these different aspects of Destiny 2 PvE. When it comes to Titan, it gets a solid B for ad clear and an S tier everywhere else. This thing is S tier for damage, survival, and tough content. If there are ads around to proc Burning Fist, then you will always dominate with this build. Now let's break down the rest of the build, starting with our subclass, got Banner of War, and then into the fray for Woven Mail. And then for our fragments, we got Thread of Generation for more grapple energy. Thread of Ascent, when we activate grapple, it auto-reloads our weapons. Thread of Warding, so picking up an Orb of Power grants Woven Mail, and then Thread of Fury, so dealing damage with a Tangle, grants melee energy. Now when it comes to our mod setup, this one's going to be a little bit different from our Warlock and Hunter builds today, because typically when I'm making a build based around a special weapon, I'm going to want to go with a special ammo finisher setup. But when I'm using Strand, and I'm using grapple specifically, I love to use grenade kickstart because grapple is so strong in my opinion that is the ability that deserves all the attention. So with the trio of heavy-handed, grenade kickstart, and impact induction, that makes it really easy to spam grapples. So to utilize that grenade kickstart, we're going to need armor charge, which we're making with a Void Siphon, heavy-handed, and then Reaper on the class item, and we can hold more armor charge because of charged up on the chest, and we can get armor charge quicker with stacks on the boots. Then we got a ton of mods focused around ability energy and Bomber Outreach, Absolution, and Innervation, and then on our helmet we have 2 copies of Hands-On for more super energy because we're basically doing nothing but meleeing. And then for our loadout we have the Buzzard for anti-barrier sidearm, the Glaive deals with unstops, and then the Hammerhead machine gun deals with overloads and also takes advantage of our Void reserves on our chest. And for our stat distribution, go for double hundreds in resilience and discipline and dump the rest into strength, and the other stats do not matter. And that about does it for the Titan build, and now we're moving on to the Hunter, and we're using none other than the Triton Vice, you guessed it, the Glaive Exotic. So it has the perk Halberdier's Breach, increases Glaive reload speed and melee damage when surrounded. Glaive melee final blows overflow around into the magazine. So when you are surrounded, you get a 100% damage buff to your Glaive melee, and you overflow the mag up to double its mag size. So it is really strong and can help you melt some things in certain situations, but this build is a little bit different than other typical Glaive builds because we're rarely ever going to be using the Glaive to melee. This is going to be a build where we use the Glaive projectile more often than not. Because if you take a look at that final ability on the Triton Vice there, it says Glaive projectile final blows detonate in an explosion. And just as a quick FYI, the Triton Vice did get a little tiny baby buff here in episode Heresy, so they reduced the delay before the explosion happens on Glaive projectile kills, so the explosion happens pretty much instantaneously. Now the reason we're mainly using projectiles with this build rather than 100% damage boosted melees is because the projectiles are what this Glaive is all about. If we look at the perk Lightning Seeker, when you consume that perk and activate it, you get this big jolting shot that like tracks along the ground. We'll talk about that in a second. But also, they gave this weapon jolting feedback. It doesn't quite say it, but it's there. So when you deal damage with 3 Glaive projectiles, it causes jolting. With all this jolting going on and these super shots from the perk, paired along with the detonations from the Triton Vice, you get some really destructive ad clear with your projectiles. So that's mainly what we want to use. And I'll show you here in Breakneck, and you can see for yourself. It's insane. You can see when we get to that second group of ads and I shoot them with my Glaive perk, it's just absolute destruction. It's as if you're shooting that group of ads with like an arc rocket launcher that has chain reaction. That's sort of what it feels like. And another reason it's good to shoot with this glaive is because it is an 80 RPM a rapid fire frame, whereas the other two class glaives are adaptive frames. So this one can shoot pretty fast. So it's safe to say that this build gets an easy S tier for ad clear, and this is the concept my previous Triton Vice build videos were based around, and that's what I often consider the most fun build I ever created. It's genuinely one of the most aggressive and effective ad clear builds in the entire game, but hardly anyone knows about it, and hardly anyone uses it. It's easily one of the most underrated builds in the game, and I mean that, and with the combination of jolting feedback and the exotic perk on the edge of concurrence, you might think this is as good as it gets for ad clear with the Triton Vice, but it's not. And I've seen a lot of people hyping up this combo since episode Heresy started, but they don't know that there are better and more explosive glaives to pair with the Triton Vice, and there's one in particular that I have my eyes on that just came out, and once I get it, I will be making another Triton Vice build video on it, so be on the lookout for that. But this glaive, for what it is, it's pretty solid. Like I said before, I could see this glaive being pretty good on Warlock builds, which we'll get to soon. The perk that shoots a wave on the floor can also be shot directly at a target, which is what I usually do because it's more consistent that way, TBH. And the explosion it causes is massive. It's like a nuke. That perk paired with Triton Vice is one of the single most satisfying things in the entire game. But if you miss that direct shot, it has no AoE when it hits the ground, so it'll just whiff entirely, but the tracking on that wave is kind of weird. It's not like a wave frame grenade launcher where it goes in a straight line. It's more of a tracking shot. And it happened in the Conflux clip if you saw that, or maybe will see that, but I missed my super shot, but the wave literally pulled a U-turn and came back to hit a target. So the tracking on this thing is pretty wild sometimes. Personally, I'm still learning how to use it because this is my first time using this glaive. Now, when it comes to difficult content in the expert loss sector, this time I'm even more underleveled. I'm 24 levels below, and it was fine, but it was nowhere as strong as Titan. In sections where there's trash mobs, sure, it's amazing, but when it comes to champions, it's a little tougher because this build doesn't have nearly the same kind of damage output as the Titan Wormgod build has, so we gotta rely on our heavy for the most part. Plus, this is probably one of the most aggravating expert loss sectors to do for a glaive video, because those taken acolytes throw out a ton of stasis and it slows you down, so that was just kind of unfortunate. So in hard content, it's not quite on Titan level, but it's still not bad. I'll give it a B. It's ad heavy content where this build shines the brightest. So with all that out of the way, let's finally break down the build, starting out with our subclass here. We have Flow State, mainly for that first ability. It says defeating a jolted target makes you amplified. That's going to keep us amplified at all times. And amplified did just get a rework in episode Heresy, so when you have it, you get a 15% damage resistance, and enemies are less accurate towards you. Pair that along with Spark of Resistance to get another 15% damage resist while surrounded, and that gives this build some amount of survivability. And our other aspect is Tempest Strike, which also received a rework in episode Heresy. It got a 57% damage buff, so it hits like a truck, but also it has a new secondary ability where defeating a jolted target grants a stack of Bolt Charge. And we all know how strong Bolt Charge is. So it's nice to have this. And for the rest of our fragments, we got Spark of Shock, which I was kind of on the fence about, and I would consider replacing with Spark of Amplitude for more orbs, therefore more survivability because of recuperation, but it's up to you. Then we got Spark of Beacons, so when we get final blows while amplified with our arc special weapon, it creates blinding explosions, another reason that it's good for survivability. And then we got Spark of Frequency, which also received a rework, so now when you are amplified and you gain Bolt Charge, you gain 2 Bolt Charge instead. Now when it comes to our mod setup, this build, since it's more geared towards spamming glaive projectiles, there's more strain on our ammo. So our mod setup's entirely focused around having infinite special ammo. That's why we got the good old infinite special setup of charged up on the chest, stacks on stacks in the boots, and then special finisher. And we also have arc reserves and arc scavenger. And then to get armor charge for these special finishers, we got Reaper on the class item, arc siphon on the helmet, and firepower on the gloves. And then we even got a copy of special finder on the helmet for just a little bit more consistency. And the rest of the mods from the top down: Dynamo, bolstering detonation, melee damage resist, and recuperation. And for the stat distribution, I would recommend tier 8 mobility because that's the sweet spot for gambler's dodge, and then double hundreds and resilience and discipline. and the rest doesn't matter. Now for our loadout, once again, we have the Buzzard for anti-barrier sidearm, and then our glaive is for unstop and overload, because we have unstoppable glaive right now, but also this glaive can jolt, and jolt deals with overload champs. So that frees up our heavy slot to be whatever we want it to be. And I went with the heavy GL, the Wendigo, because this build kind of lacks burst damage for those chunkier targets. So I wanted like a burst DPS heavy. And that about does it for the Hunter build. So while the Titan shines in damage and the Hunter build shines in ad clear, which build shines in survival? One could argue that the Titan build wins in survival, and it's hard to argue with that because of Woven Mail and Banner of War. But now we come to the Warlock build, whose sole purpose is survival. This build is borderline invincible because we are on Prismatic using the Karnstein Armlets. Now, the Karnstein Armlets has the perk Vampire's Caress, melee and finisher final blows instantly grant cure and provide restoration for a short duration. It's actually not a short duration, it's like several seconds, and it's refreshable. However, when you get a melee final blow with the glaive melee or a regular melee, it gives you restoration ×1, but finisher final blows, what it doesn't tell you, is they grant you restoration ×2. And then when you have restoration ×2, subsequent melee, glaive melee final blows will then refresh that restoration ×2, and you can keep it going forever. So it's very, very good for survivability, especially with glaives. But on top of having infinite restoration ×2, we also have the aspect Feed the Void to give us Devour. Not only is it just Devour, but it's Super Devour for bonus grenade energy and bonus health back on final blows. And then on top of that, our other aspect is Lightning Surge, which when you deal damage with Lightning Surge, you also get Bolt Charge now, another rework. But also remember that amplified rework from before we talked about on Hunter. When you have amplified, enemies are less accurate towards you, and you also get a 15% damage resist. And this is the reason why the Hunter class glaive could be good on Warlock, because it can help you stay amplified more. But anyways, we also have Facet of Protection for another 15% damage resistance while we are surrounded. But then we also have a new artifact mod right now called Hold the Line. So while surrounded, glaives gain increased reload speed and stability, and also final blows heal you. So let's take it from the top. Infinite restoration ×2, Devour, Amplified, Spark of Resistance, resist mods on our chest, Hold the Line artifact mod, and also the fact that holding up a glaive shield gives you like 99% DR, and this build is literally invincible. This is the unkillable Warlock build. Now let's talk about our glaive. Now obviously you already know that when you activate your perk, it throws out a healing turret, so that's just pretty overkill on top of all the other healing and survivability shenanigans we already got going on. Now the healing turrets did just receive a nerf, so now you have to be damaged for the healing turret to actually shoot a shot at you. And you'll see later in the Expert Loss sector, it's good to set up a healing turret when you're going to be busy swapping off your glaive to deal with the champion with one of your other weapons. So it's good for that purpose at least. But they also updated this glaive with the perk Incandescent, which is a nice little added bonus. Now let me show you how that does in Breakneck, and I really wanted more out of this ad clear. I expected more solar ignitions, but if you want that, you really kind of got to be on the solar subclass with Ember of Ashes. So, as it is, the Greasy Luck from Ghost of the Deep is just better for this purpose because it's a rapid fire frame. It's not bad. At the end of the day, it is still incandescent, but it's definitely the worst of the 3 glaives we use today. The destabilizing rounds buff was just too juicy, and the Hunter glaive can be paired with Triton Vice, and that's just borderline broken. So in comparison, the Warlock glaive just doesn't feel as good, but it's still not bad. Now when it comes to tough content, the Warlock was definitely the most sluggish in the Expert Loss sector, since it isn't as aggressive as the Hunter or Titan versions, and especially due to the annoying stasis stuff I mentioned earlier. But at the end of the day, I had no trouble surviving with that glaive shield providing like that 99% DR. I can just block all day long, fire off a magazine, charge that Healy turret, set it up, go back to blocking, and I'm good. It feels like no matter what you do, this build will always have something keeping you alive at all times. Every time I was getting low, I just got free health out of nowhere. Every time I knew I was about to deal with a champ, I just set up a turret. Every time I knew I was about to fly into a group of ads with my Electro Slide, I set up a turret. Champs are pretty prime finisher targets, so it's pretty easy to get that restoration ×2 online, and having that Devour with Amplified just makes you so resilient. Titan's method of survival was just pure brute force, like how can anything kill you if it's dead, right? That was the logic Titan was going for. This one's logic is slow and steady wins the race. I'll give it an A for hard content, Not quite an S like the Titan, but I would still place Titan above this because I'm a biased Titan main, and Grapple is my favorite ability in the entire game. But Electro Slide is a close second, and it lets you rack up that Bolt Charge, because if you get Bolt Charge going, then subsequent weapon damage can give you more stacks of Bolt Charge. So having those triple charges with the Needle ability is nice. So if you are a Warlock main and you want a new survival build in your arsenal, and Speaker Sight ain't cutting it for you in solo play anymore after the nerf it received to the healing turrets, then I would highly recommend giving this one a try, because it just does not die in a majority of content. For Grandmasters though, that remains to be seen. Now let's break down the rest of the build. Now we already went over our aspects, Feed the Void and Lightning Surge. Now one might be curious why we're not running Hellion. It's because when I was running Hellion, my Hellion was hogging all the kills and I wouldn't be able to charge my Glaive perk. So it kind of got in the way. Plus, Lightning Surge is nice to get amplified and also get Bolt Charge going. Now for our fragments, we already went over protection. So for the rest of them, we got Faceted Dominance, so our Vortex Grenades can cause weaken. Then we got Facet of Awakening, so we can make Ionic Traces, Fire Sprites, Void Breaches, and whatnot. Then we got Facet of Hope, so when we have an elemental buff, our class ability regenerates more quickly, and we're pretty much always going to be amplified. And then we have Facet of Purpose, so picking up an Orb of Power is going to give us Overshields, because we have Nova Bomb as our equipped super. So 3 overshields on top of everything else going on. Yeah, once again, survivability just through the roof. Now for our mod setup, this one's kind of like the opposite of Hunter, because Hunter was like all about shooting projectiles, but this one's gonna melee more often than not. So we do have Special Finisher, but it's not like a mod setup geared towards like infinite special ammo. So just Special Finisher and 1 copy of Solar Reserves, and that's like the extent of our special ammo here. And of course we got double Special Finders, because why not? So for the rest of our mods from the top going down, Solar Siphon, Solar Loader, Heavy Handed, Impact Induction, Melee Damage Resist, Solar Resist, Absolution, Invigoration, Recuperation, Outreach, and Reaper. It's kind of all just geared towards ability spam. And for our stat distribution, it's exactly the same as Titan. Prioritize 100 Resilience and Discipline and dump the rest into Strength, and the rest doesn't matter. And for the loadout, it's the same as Titan. Buzzard for anti-barrier sidearm, the Glaive for unstop, and then the Hammerhead machine gun with 4th times target lock for overloads. And that about does it for our Class Glaive builds for today. Honestly, I love all these builds and they all deserve their own separate videos, but I decided to compile them into one because they all follow the same theme. Now once again, abuse the bug while you can. Should Bungie just make it a feature and just abolish the class requirement? To be honest, I'm not sure, because that's kind of what makes them exotic. If they could be used on any class, then they should be updated with extra abilities to make them feel more exotic, if you know what I mean. Otherwise, they kind of just feel like average glaives, just slightly better. The only one that truly feels exotic, TBH, is the Titan. But anyways, I'll leave the dim loadout links to all 3 of these builds down below in the description, and also the pinned comment if you'd like to give them a try. And if you got any buddies who like glaives, I'd appreciate if you consider sharing the video with them. Maybe this is something they might want to try out. So which was your favorite build today? Let me know in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to hit the like button. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here for more episode Heresy content on the way, because there's a lot in the works, and I hope you stick around for more. And remember to check out our sponsor, Advanced GG. Code Maven at checkout for 10% off your order. Link down below, and I will catch you in the next video. See you later.